Supreme Court versus the Voting Rights Act. If the Supreme Court can quietly undo 60 years of civil rights protection, is American democracy actually being governed or just managed? Okay. Let's see. This topic has explosive debate potential. What actually happened? The relationship between the Supreme Court and the Voting Rights Act has reached a historic turning point. Just a few days ago, April 29, 2026, the court issued a landmark ruling in Louisiana versus Callis that many legal experts are calling the final blow to the Voting Rights Act as we know it. To understand the details, it helps to look at how the court has systematically dismantled the law into the law's two main pillars over the last decade. Okay. As a non-American, I don't know what the Voting Rights Act is. Let's just get a description. Voting Right Act of 1965. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 is a landmark U.S. federal statute that prohibits racial discrimination in voting. It was signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson during the height of the Civil Rights Movement. Okay, so prohibits racial discrimination in voting. How do you do that? How does that work? Like, isn't there, if you make a law that's like, oh, you can't use race, and can't they just make up another reason to gerrymander or whatever? Like, it doesn't seem to have stopped the gerrymandering problem in the US because I keep hearing about that. Alright, let's just read up on what's happening. This case centered on Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which prohibits voting practices that discriminate based on race. Okay, the conflict. After a previous court order required Louisiana to create a second majority black congressional district to comply with the Voting Rights Act, the state did so. The SB8 map. However, a group of voters challenged this new map, calling it an unconstitutional racial gerrymander. The decision in a 6-3 ruling, the Supreme Court struck down the map. Justice Samuel Alito, writing for the majority, argued that the state used race too predominantly in drawing the line. So, they were required to create a second majority black congressional district to comply with the Voting Rights Act. The new map they created, the state did so. The new map they created was struck down, argued that the state used race too predominantly in drawing the lines. But wasn't that the idea? They needed to create a second majority black congressional district. How do you do that without using race to draw lines? Like, am I missing something? So, the new map was struck down because they complied with a previous court order for the Voting Rights Act. Okay. the intent shift. Crucially, the court updated the standard for Section 2. It held that to prove a map is discriminatory, plaintiffs must now essentially show intentional discrimination rather than just proving the map results in less opportunity for minority voters. Court updated the standard for Section 2. It held that to prove that a map is discriminatory, the plaintiffs are the ones bringing forward the complaint, must now essentially show intentional discrimination rather than just proving the map results in less opportunity. So you can't just use the effect of the map. You have to be able to show intentional discrimination. Dissent. Justice Ellen King took the rare step of reading her dissent from the bench, stating that the court has eviscerated the law and created an almost insurmountable barrier for anyone trying to challenge discriminatory maps in the future. Oh. So the discriminatory map was challenged by a court. They changed it, and the change was shut down. Argued that the state used race too predominantly in drawing the line. How else do you create two majority black congressional districts without using race to draw the lines? Like, their argument on why they shut it down, I don't understand. Like, the Voting Rights Act prevents discrimination based on race, right? But you have to look at and draw based on race if you want to try and prevent the discrimination based on race. The very Voting Rights Act itself is basically stating that the map can't be race blind. It should take into consideration race when drawing a map. They shut it down on the argument that it used race too predominantly in drawing the line. I mean, the effect of this is, as they say, anyone trying to challenge discriminatory maps in the future are going to have a much harder time. I just like that argument. That argument is weird. Let's continue. Let's see the full context. The context, decade of dismantling. This latest decision is the third and final act in a trilogy of cases that has redefined American voting law. Okay, 2013, Shelby County versus Holder. Struck down Section 4, effectively freezing Section 5. Not gonna go. They've been coming after this law for a long time by the looks. What happens now? The ripple effect of the Canis decision are already being felt across the U.S. as the 2026 midterm elections approach. Map redrawing. Several southern states, including Alabama and Tennessee, have already called special legislative sessions to redraw their maps. Republican lawmakers are citing this ruling as a green light to crack or pack minority districts to gain partisan advantage. So, from my understanding, what you're doing, and like, this is gerrymandering, right? What you're doing is you're trying to get as slim a majority as possible in as many different districts as possible, because that is what gets you the most wins, right? The most legislators. That's how you win the most districts. And then you pack all the people that aren't going to vote for you into a couple specific districts that they'll win. The issue that you run into with this is that, say you want to win a district just by a little bit, right? Like you want to win it with like 55% of the vote, and because you want to win the majority of the districts with that. If there is a large scale shift in voting, all the districts could flip, rather than having districts that are always going to be your way, because you've essentially made them all more competitive in order to get more of them. But this can turn on you. And if the Democrats see this and start targeting these districts with a closer, that have been historically red, but now have a closer majority, they're more competitive, the district is more competitive now, they might be able to flip some of them, and you could end up losing more districts in the end. I don't know. The whole gerrymandering thing is weird. We want to go to... Is there gerrymandering in Canada? Do we redraw district? Okay, short answer, not in the same way as the US, but the issue can appear in milder form. Why Canada mostly avoids gerrymandering? Canada is often cited as an example of how to prevent gerrymandering because 1. Independent commissions draw the maps. Federal electorate boundaries are drawn by nonpartisan, arm's-length commissions in each province. Politicians do not design or approve the map. This greatly reduces opportunities for partisan manipulation. 2. Public input plus transparent process. Commissions hold public hearings, publish draft maps, take feedback before finalizing boundaries. This makes hidden manipulation very difficult. 3. Rules limit political influence. Seat numbers and boundaries are guided by population counts from the census. Representation rules in the Electoral Boundaries Readjustment Act. Limits on population deviation. Parliament can object, but it cannot directly redraw the maps. So does gerrymandering ever happen? Not in the classic US sense. Extreme partisan map rigging. But two softer issues occur. Malaporto. Gosh. The heck. Luckily. And I don't know how to say it.
Malapportionment. Malapportionment.
Malapportionment. Okay. I get the malapportionment. Unequal population across ridings. Some ridings have fewer voters than others, especially in rural, northern, or protected provinces, like Prince Edward Island. This is not deliberate gerrymandering. It's built into Canadian Constitution rules to protect regional representation. But the effect is similar. A voter in a small rural riding can have more weight than one in a larger urban riding. I mean, like if they've taken that into account, into constitutional rules, and that's the part of the system. Subtle biases through commission decisions. Even independent commissions make judgment calls. Where to put boundaries, how to weight communities of interest, how much population deviation to allow. Sometimes parties gain or lose somewhat based on these choices. There is no evidence of systematic partisan. Bottom line, Canada is considered one of the least gerrymandered democracies because elected officials do not control a map drawing process. However, representation imbalances still exist, mainly due to population differences and neutral commission decisions, not deliberate partisan. Okay, I officially like our system because we don't have this problem at all. What happens now? The ripple effects of the Canis decisions are already being felt across the US. I get down to read that. Southern states have already called special to redraw their maps. Partisan shield. Court basically ruled that if a map looks like it discriminates against black voters, but the state claims that they were just trying to help their political party, partisan gerrymander, the map is likely legal. Congressional response. There are renewed calls from civil rights groups for Congress to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which would effectively reset the law to its original strength, though it faces a steep climb in a divided legislature. In short, the result test protected minority voters' voting power for 60 years has been replaced by a much stricter intent test, making the Voting Rights Act a significantly weaker tool than it was even a year ago. Basically, they're making this harder, where a court orders Louisiana to create a second majority black congressional district. They've made that harder to do by ruling against this one. And so now, rather than looking at the results, does this discriminate? You have to prove intent to discriminate. And proving intent is significantly more difficult. Because they can just say, I was doing this for my political party, rather than I was doing this to disenfranchise black vote. Well, that's a dangerous system. As I said, though, like, when you gerrymander, you are essentially making districts more competitive, and you make a district more competitive, it can flip. It is just easier to flip. So I'll be interested. Like, will the Democrats try to do that? Like, target some of these districts that now have a closer riding? This will make it interesting because there are places where the Democrats, they don't really focus on certain areas, because if the district's always being red by a large majority, then what's the point? You're not gonna even if you get some people in that district to swap, they're not gonna swap the district itself. But if you suddenly make that district more competitive, all of a sudden, like, maybe you see a push to try and get like Texan and Floridan people to vote Democrat, because it takes less of them to switch a district. And if you see something like that, like, you could see a big shift. I mean, I think this is going to make the midterms interesting. I still prefer the Canadian system, but I mean, it will be entertaining. When are the midterms in the US? Tuesday, November 3rd. So the midterms are early November. The Alberta referendum is late November. November is going to be a busy month. What is at stake? 2026 midterms are particularly significant as they occur during President Trump's second term. The entire balance of power in Washington is up for grabs. House of Representatives, all 435 seats are up for election. Currently, Republicans hold a slim majority, and Democrats only need to flip a few seats to take control. This is why they're gerrymandering so hard. Just a couple seats. That is the difference. U.S. Senate, 35 of the 100 seats are being contested. This includes 33 regular cycle seats and 2 special elections in Florida and Ohio to fill vacancies left by Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance. Oh, so these guys were senators, and they left the Senate to become part of the administration. So now their seats need to be refilled, but they're probably pretty... I'd imagine those are pretty safe districts. Unless you've gerrymandered them and made them more competitive. Then who knows? Gubernational races. Gubernational. 39 states and territories will be electing governors. Redistricting impact, as mentioned before. The recent Supreme Court ruling in Louisiana versus Callis has triggered a late cycle scramble in several states to redraw congressional maps, which could significantly shift the math for which party wins the House. Interesting. It looks like they're just gonna let them run wild and gerrymander and see what happens. Which states are looking at changing their maps before the midterms? Unprecedented last minute scramble. Okay, Louisiana, the epicenter. Immediately following the ruling, Governor Jeff Landry took the extraordinary step of suspending the state's May 16 congressional primary, even though absentee voting had already begun. Wait, can you do that? Suspending the state's primary, even though voting had already begun. The goal: redraw the maps to eliminate the second majority black district that the Supreme Court just ruled was unconstitutionally racial gerrymandering. So what, they go back to a single black majority district now? Goal is to go back. I mean, like, if the Supreme Court was the one that decided it, I guess, like, isn't that what they have to do? You don't want to go against the Supreme Court. The impact. This move is intended to flip one Democratic seat back to Republican control before November. It has already sparked a wave of emergency lawsuits from voters who had already cast ballots. Of course. Doesn't? this is a primary. I don't understand the primary system. Like this is choosing a party leader, right? Okay. Let's learn the other ones. Alabama seeking to reset. Alabama officials filed an emergency motion to lift a previous court order. Florida targeting the Fair Districts Amendment. Tennessee targeting the lone Democrat. What? Tennessee Governor Bill Lee and state leaderships are discussing redrawing lines to target the state's remaining Democrat held seat in Nashville. So the Democrats get exactly one seat in Tennessee, and they're like, no, you will get none. We will find a way to give you none. Other states to watch. While the South is primarily focusing the primary focus of the redistricting war. The redistricting war has become a national tit for tat. South Carolina, California, Virginia. Oh, it's a mess. This mid-decade redistricting is highly unusual. Historically, courts have avoided changing district lines so close to an election. But the 2026 Supreme Court has signaled that these traditional expectations may no longer apply. I mean, just think, you could have it done by an independent commission that just sets it all up, and then your lawmakers, they don't get to change it or work it in any way. And then there's none of this. Like, there is a better system. There is. And it is being used in other places. I don't think it's good to give parties control. Like, there was a quote. Let me make sure I get this right. This isn't voters choosing who represents them. It's who represents them choosing their voters. And I don't think that's a good idea.